The whole point of creating decoders and rules is so that we can search for things in our dashboard. Remember how I said there are two different sources. We have alerts, and then I mixed it up with monitoring, but the other one I was thinking of is archives. So anything that gets decoded goes into archives, whether or not there is a rule that it matched.
Only where the rule is matched, it goes to alerts.
Yes.
Else it goes to
If it
archives.
matches a rule, it goes to alerts. So this, which one you search for, becomes relevant. And I forget what the other ones are. I think monitoring just is specifically looking for like how the system is doing as a whole. So Wazuh also pulls in other information like CPU usage, RAM usage, processes that are running currently. So that's going to be in the monitoring. And then I forget what all of these are. Actually, I do remember what all of these are. States vulnerabilities is Wazuh also does like a regular vulnerability check to see if like any of your services are outdated and maybe match a known vulnerability. So that would be pulled in here. But the main ones you're going to be using as, let's say, a SOC analyst are the alerts and the archives.
Remember, so which framework that states vulnerabilities follow to find out like all the vulnerabilities?
That's a very good question, and I don't know that I should speak on that because I don't entirely know because I didn't really investigate that too much. My guess would be that they have it baked into somewhere into their source code, would be my guess. Probably in rule set. About lists. Maybe not lists. I'm going to guess that they have some like that they release this CVE. They probably like grab CVEs, write the rules for those CVEs, even though they're not like rules in the same normal place that we see them, but they probably have like Wazuh rules for those CVEs. But I don't know. This is a guess. So I'm sure you could find that information in their documentation. But I don't know. That's a very good question, though, and I will look it up because I am curious. But for now, as a SOC analyst, you're probably going to be looking at alerts and archives. So which one you search depends if there's going to be a rule for it or not. If there's going to be a rule for it, you might as well search alerts because that's going to narrow down the amount of logs that you're getting, which is going to make your searches faster. If there is no rule associated with what you're trying to find, then you're stuck with searching archives. So let's then go to this. I've been saying so a lot. Apologize for that. Let's go to this post. I know I put it somewhere. Maybe I put announcements. There we go. Dashboard's query language. This is the dashboard's query language that Wazuh uses for searching based on OpenSearch, which I believe is the follow-up to the Elk Stack. Once Elk Stack changed their licensing model, then there was, I think OpenStack then took over, and then OpenSearch is the way to like search in OpenStack. Anyway, point is, this is how we search in Wazuh. And as you can see how it says DQL here, if you click on it, it even says the OpenSearch dashboard's query language. So I could have even clicked here and gotten to that same page in case you ever forget it. It's very straightforward, so let's read through what it says. You can search for terms by simply putting any value in there, and then that'll search for that value anywhere in the log. And by default, if you don't say and or, it'll put like an implicit or in between them. So for each of these, you can search for the word rises anywhere in the log or the word wind anywhere in the log. If you did rises and capital A&D and wind, it will search only for logs that contain rises and contain wind. If you used capital OR for or, it would do the same thing that it does here because implicitly it uses or. It'll search for any logs that contain rises or wind. If you have spaces, like you specifically want to look for the phrase wind space rises, you would enclose it in quotes. You can escape, let's say you're looking for a quote. If you wanted to explicitly look for a quote in the log, you can escape that with a backslash. If you do backslash quote character, that'll tell it look for the quote character. Don't treat that as a quote, if that makes sense. Question so far?
Good.
They talk about the following reserved characters need to be escaped because all of these characters have special meaning. That brings us to this next option. Instead of searching all fields, which could take a really long amount of time, especially if we're searching for a very large time frame, we can make our searches faster by only searching a specific field. Also, if we want to be more specific, like if we're looking for something to be present in a specific field, then we can search for it in that specific field. When I say field, what do I mean? Well, when we were looking at our rules that we created, when we were creating our decoders, remember how we pulled out these values and assigned them key names? Each of those key names becomes a field that we can search on. And when we created our rules, right, we looked for specific fields, right? So same thing that when we created rules, we looked for specific fields. Here, we can look for specific fields. And the way we do that is we put the field name, colon, and then what we actually want to search for. So in this case, this is going to search for rises or wind in the title field. Here they have a bunch of different examples. Search for text that just show like different variations of this and how you might use it, right? The third thing we didn't talk about yet is this wildcard. So if you want anything that maybe has, let's say you want to search multiple fields, like let's say there's title and tootle, and you want to search both of them.
Just like we use for the in PowerShell, right?
Yes.
For MC.
Yes, just like when we were using get command earlier to search for the add type command. You can use
just exactly like that.
You can use a wildcard here. You could put wildcards at the beginning of the word, end of the word, or in the middle of the word. And you could use it for both the fields and the values. So if you know you want to search for, let's say you want to, this example might not make too much sense without context, but let's say you want to look for a PowerShell test file, and you know that it's going to have that PowerShell test files are going to be named something like this. Sorry. And so in this case, the beginning and the end are exactly the same for each PowerShell test file. The only thing that changes is the middle. So I could do a search that looks like this. I could replace these middle characters with a wildcard, and that would pull back all of those values. The one thing that I learned from playing around with it, and that I personally hate about the dashboard's query language, but it's something you have to deal with, if you're using quotes, you can't use a wildcard. So you are limited to either a wildcard or quotes, but not both. If you find a way to use both wildcard and quotes, please let me know, because that would be really cool, and I would like that. You can kind of get around that by every time there's a space, you could just put a wildcard instead of a space, which is unideal because, a wildcard would search for more than just a space, but like, it still, is a way to go. If you didn't totally get what I said there, I'm not too worried, because you would figure it out if you were playing around with it. But The other options we have, other than that colon, is we have greater than, less than symbols. This is especially for numbers. So that applies to any sort of numbers or dates. You can look for greater than or less than. So when it comes to dates, if you say date greater than 2013-0101, it'll look for any date that is comes after to 2013-0101. You can also do less than. You can do less than or equal to, right? And then lastly, you have the negation operator. So if you want to find something where page views, in this case, for example, is not 100, you can search for page views is 100, and you could add the not operator at the beginning to negate that. So you have and, or, and not. And then the last piece to the puzzle, the only piece that we're missing, is there's an order of operations, just like in arithmetic or multiplication, addition, subtraction. There's an order of operations where pluses get evaluated, multiplication gets evaluated first, then pluses, right? So here, I forget the exact order, but it does mention it somewhere. I think ors get evaluated first, ands get evaluated second. But if you wanted to change that order, other way around. Nots get evaluated first, ands get evaluated second, and ors get evaluated third. So in this case, see how we have media type, article, or, title, wind, and description epic? The way that it would treat this is it would do title, wind, and description epic first. So it'll look for all logs that have title, wind, and description epic. And then it'll say, or media type is article. So either the log has a title of wind and a description of epic, or they have a media type of article. In either case, it would display that log. However, if you wanted to change the order of operations, you could add parentheses. So in this case, if we wanted that or to be evaluated first, we add parentheses around media type article or title wind. And now the way this will work is the first thing it'll look at is whether the media type is article or the title is wind. In that case, it'll show the log if the description is also epic, because the and got evaluated second. So in this case, every log that it shows has to have description epic, right? In this case, it didn't have to have description epic. It could have had description epic, or the media type was article, right? So just different ways of evaluating it. Any questions there?
No.
Cool. And that's pretty much, if you have nested fields, for example. So here we did catpix.reaction, right? And when we were defining our decoder, when we decoded it, we called it catpix.reaction. Catpix can be considered the parent, and this person or reaction or image or adjective, those are all kind of considered a child. So another way of searching is I could actually say pretend patient says catpix, and then name says reaction, right? And that would specifically search for reaction within catpix. This is one way of writing it. When it's a simple example like this, so this is one way of writing that. The other way of writing that is catpix.reaction. And both of these would be the same statement, basically. However, this notation is useful when you have multiple things you're looking for that are nested, right? So let's say I was looking for catpix reaction is liked and catpix person is John. One way I could do that is catpix.reaction liked and catpix.person is John. That's my preferred way of doing it. But another way of doing it that may be cleaner, especially if you have a lot of those, is to say I believe you could do something like cat pics, reaction, liked, and person, John. And this is just a easier way of, or different, I guess, way of writing this, where we're very much showing the nesting parent-child relationship between cat pics and reaction in person. Questions?
No.
Okay. Now we have fully gone over searching in Wazuh. So let's talk about how we can search for something actually useful. I'm going to go on to DC SRV01. I'll log into it. And I have this terminal window open here, right? Let's say I run ipconfig. Or let's say I'm an attacker right now and I have access to this machine, right? And I'm here in this terminal window and I'm running commands. Let's say I'm running ipconfig/all. And now I was able to get the IP address information for this machine. This may not be the best example because this is something a benign user would likely do as well. But let's say this is something an attacker ran. How can we as defenders see that an attacker ran this? Well, the most straightforward way is just searching for ipconfig. We know in this case that we ran ipconfig, so just as a proof of concept, I'll search for it and show you that that ipconfig does show up in our logs. Now here's the question, do we want to search alerts or do we want to search archives?
We should search archives because
Why?
there's a possibility that there's no rule written for it.
That is a great answer. I love that answer. The way I was going to approach it is I was going to say, let's think about our log source and where that's actually going and whether there is a rule for it. But you absolutely could search archives and then see. So let's do that. That's a great idea. Let's go to archives. It might be erroring out just because there's so many to search, but there we go. So, and then let's say we do, instead of the last 24 hours, you can actually specify the time range to search your logs for. So you can do an absolute time, date and time that you can pick. You can do a relative time, so how many hours, minutes, days, seconds ago. Or you can just select now, which doesn't make sense as much for start time, but for end time. Like you could say all the logs up until the current point in time. So whenever we're doing our start time, let's say we do 15 minutes to now, to the current time. And then that automatically changed it when I clicked out of that to last 15 minutes. If I do ipconfig, this is going to search all fields in all logs for ipconfig. And look at that, we have a log. So let's take a look at this log. We do have our full command line here. What kind of a log is this? Let's identify the log source. So the log source, if we go to data win system provider name, you can see Microsoft Windows Sysmon. So we're actually getting this log from Sysmon. Remember, Sysmon uses event IDs for its logs, so we can also see if we see the event ID. Event ID 1. And if we look up Sysmon in sysinternals, and we go to see what an event ID of 1 corresponds to process creation. So when we ran the ipconfig command, that actually ran this ipconfig.exe binary on disk, and that spawned a new process. So that's why we got the process creation. Again, if an organization wasn't forwarding Sysmon logs or wasn't collecting that Sysmon data, they would not be able to see that we just ran ipconfig. But again, this is going to keep track of every single process that's created. And so for some organizations, keeping track of every single process that's created on every single machine might just be too much data for them to ingest, especially if they don't have as much storage space for that kind of data. So it's a, hit or miss. But in this case, what other information does it give us? So here we have the full log, which is shown here, but it's shown in this kind of like ugly to read format, right? So what Wazuh did is it took each of these keys and values and it mapped them, right? So we can read it here. So for example, see how this starts with win? Well, here we have data.win, right? And then here we can read what we have. And so for example, we can see the user that ran that command is Vagrant. We can see that the parent command that spawned the process, in this case was cmd.exe because I was running it in a cmd.exe session. We can see that the actual created process was ipconfig, the actual executable was ipconfig.exe. And we can see the full command line. Now, do we see any? We don't actually see any rule level for this. So that would tell us that if we tried to search for this ipconfig command in Wazuh alerts, we wouldn't be able to find it. So for sysmon process creation, we have to search in archives unless there's a specific rule defined for that process creation. If we go to Wazuh and we go to its rule set and we go to rules, let's go to sysmon rules. Here you can see if it's Microsoft Windows sysmon on informational. We're grouping it into, or information 1, we're grouping it into sysmon event ID 1. And then looking at sysmon event ID 1 here, you can see that we do have some specific rules that were created when there's a suspicious process. So here we have like a suspicious process. Here we have an exclusion for that. So the process is suspicious, but the parent image was legitimate. So we're actually not going to log that. Now, anything that is not defined here as a rule, like we saw before, gets logged to that, logged to archives, but does not actually get sent to alerts. Similarly, if the level is set to 0, that tells it, don't create an alert, just send it to archives. So that's why these exclusions work, right? Like now if we set this to 0, it's not going to create an alert for it at all. It's just going to give us the logs. Okay. So now that you learned that every command that we run in PowerShell basically creates this, except for some built-in commands, we'll talk about those later, but any command that's not a built-in command that we run in PowerShell spawns a new process. It might be useful for us to look at created processes, right? So let's say the attacker ran a bunch of commands. So we'll run, I don't know if dir is built in or not, but I'm just going to run dir. We're going to run ping. Maybe we'll do nslookup. And so we ran a few different commands. What I can do is I can filter for sysmon event ID 1, or process creation events. So the neat thing about this Discover dashboard that Wazuh has is there are many different ways I can go about filtering. So I could look for example, let's say I already knew I was looking for sysmon. I could go down here. I could go to data win system provider name. And if I click on the search icon, it gives me, well, let me just remove my ipconfig search here. It gives me all the different values for that. So if I do the search now, you see we have a lot of Microsoft Windows security auditing. We have sysmon, and we have our Aurora agent, right? So in this case, we're looking for sysmon. If I want to filter specifically for sysmon, I can click this plus icon. If I want to filter for something that isn't sysmon, I can click this minus icon. This will just show me the top 5 values that I'm getting here. If I want to visualize all of them, I can click the visualize button, and this will create a new visualization that will show me all those different fields and how many logs there are for each field. So you can see we're having most logs for the security auditing and then second most for Sysmon. So just different things that make it really easy to search these logs. But anyway, if I want to filter on that value, data.win, now I lost it. I'm seeing stats. Oh, and I should mention the way what shows up in this left-hand side depends on what you actually end up searching. So if you filter, for example, you saw when I filtered for ipconfig, and then if I go to Win system provider name, now if I search for the top 5 values, you only see Microsoft Windows Sysmon. So this might be useful, like let's say you want to see top talkers, and you've in your query here, you already limit it to web traffic. Like let's say you want to see the top IPs that are connecting to your web application. You can write a filter here that looks for only web traffic, right? And then you can go for data.sourceIP and you can look for the top 5 IPs specific to web traffic, right? Anyway, just to show how I can press plus, and now I've added this to my search. So now we're filtering on this. And now if I were to remove ipconfig here and just press enter, all of these should have the provider, should be Microsoft Windows Sysmon. You can see if it even highlights it for you. This brings me to, there are actually 2 ways of searching. So I could have written this, data win system provider name Microsoft Windows System. I could have written it here. Or I could have clicked add filter and then done data, the same thing, basically. Find the key and then use one of these operators, is not, is one of, exists, does not exist, and then the value. The nice thing about this is it'll give me drop downs showing me different options that I have based on the log data that it's already pulled. So sometimes, and when you actually click those plus, like the plus that we clicked here to add it to our search, or the minus to exclude it, that will add these filters down here. But they functionally work the same way. Okay. You can do the same thing with any of the values in this log. So now that we have these Sysmon logs pulled up, let's say we want an event ID of 1. So 11 is not what we want. Let me see. Okay, so one thing I can do is I can add columns. So right now I just have these raw logs, and looking through them is kind of annoying because I have to click this drop down and look through the raw logs. But what I can do to make it easier on myself is, let's say I want to pick out specific columns that are of interest to me. So for example, let's say I want to just make sure that all of these do have provider name of Microsoft Windows Sysmon. I can click toggle column and table. And now, if I unexpand this, you can see in my table, we see Microsoft Windows Sysmon. I can also add that event ID column. And then from there, I can reorder these columns if I want. So I can move this one to the left by clicking this, like these little left and right arrows that pop up. I could remove this column by clicking the remove column button, right?
Ascending order.
And I can sort it by this column. So if I want to sort by in ascending order, right, I click that. And it might take a little bit. It actually failed to sort it here, which is kind of funny. But it should, in theory, sort it. You can see it isn't changing something. So I'm wondering if it's like, oh, so you can actually sort on multiple. Okay, this is where it gets confusing. You can sort on multiple columns. So you can sort on, for example, timestamp can be the primary sort, and then this column will be the secondary sort. So I can remove the sort. If I remove the sort on timestamp, now it'll just sort by event ID. Cool. So then the neat thing here, now I can see this event ID 1, and again, I can click everywhere you see there's a plus and a minus, and the plus always means add that to our filter, and the minus means exclude it from our filter. So if I added the minus, it would give me everything where the event ID is not 1. But if I click the plus, it's everything where the event ID is 1, right? And then now these columns aren't particularly useful to us in this case, like they don't give us the information we're looking for. We're most interested in, let's say, the host where the process was created. So that would be agent.name, right? So I'll add that as a column. And then probably the command line. And look at that. When I added that to our search, we have these that are unrelated to our activity. It looks like it's Microsoft Exchange doing something. But we do see our ping and our NSLOOKUP. The other thing that might be useful to us is the process ID. So that's the parent process ID, but we can see the current process ID. And then knowing the process ID, we can start, or sorry, actually in this case, we do want the parent process ID. I'll tell you why in a second. Because these are process creation events. Oh, I did not mean to search for that. Anyway, I can remove that field that I accidentally created. Anyway, so I added this parent process ID column. And we know that any time that we run a command, we're running it from our command prompt, right? We're running it from cmd.exe. So the parent process ID for both the NSLOOKUP and the ping, notice that they're both exactly the same. Why? Because we ran them both from the same cmd.exe parent process. And so this is how you can tie what an attacker is doing together. So now you know that, let's say the process they're using has ID 5444. Now you can look at all the commands that they ran or all the processes that they spawned from that one. You could even, let's say you don't normally run cmd.exe, you can see that the parent image is cmd.exe, right? So if I add that here as a column, for both of these, we have the parent image cmd.exe. So what I could even do is I could create a rule for this. I could say if the parent image is cmd.exe, let's say we don't normally run commands in our environment. Let's say our users don't use the command prompt. We can say if the parent image is cmd.exe and we have an event ID of 1 in sysmon, alert on that, right? So that's how we might go about writing rules. Also, we could further refine the search, right? Like just to see the commands that we ran. If we don't want to see all these ones that are default, anything that's created by this Microsoft Exchange service is probably not going to be an attacker. It's probably going to be like the Microsoft Exchange service. So I can even go in and I can go to parent image, or basically the process that spawned this one, Microsoft Exchange Diagnostic Service, and I can exclude that with the filter out value. And boom, now we're only seeing the commands that we ran. And so if I run more commands, like for example, I don't know.
There are competitions, okay? So do they have like any dashboard like this?
Sorry, say that again?
When there are like any sort of competitions, like defending something or attacking, do they have like dashboards like this?
Yeah, so in a competition, like Splunk, for example, that you get in CCDC, this Collegiate Cyber Defense competition, works really similarly to Wazuh when we're talking about searching at least, and writing alerts and dashboards. When we start the competition,
we know that there will be an attacking team and we know that there will be a defending team. So what we can do, we can just do the filter and start it from the current time. So anything from now till end will be logged on, and we just set some rules so we know what they're doing actually.
You are jumping right into what I want to show next. So great job. You are right on track. Anyway, if I want to refresh this data, I'll click refresh. And now we can see our ipconfig command came in there. Fortunately, the data in this environment, since it's so small, it gets ingested pretty fast. So it's like within a matter of seconds, you'll see it populate. In larger environments where there's so much data to be sent forth, it might send it in batch, and you might only see it like pop up every so often. So then you might have to wait a couple minutes for that information to come in, especially if there's a lot of it, right? But Okay, you might be thinking to yourself, well, this information is really useful to see, right? So maybe I want to create a dashboard for this. First of all, I can save this query in Wazuh so I can use it later. I do that by clicking the Save button. So if I click Save, I can save my search. I just give it a name. So I'll call this Process Creation, let's say. Actually, I think I already have one named Process Creation, so let's do sysmon Process Creation. Click Save. And now at any given time, I can open my saved searches or my saved dashboards by clicking Open. And then you'll see a list of my saved ones, including this one that we just created, and I can click on it to open it. Let's say I wanted to rename it. You would click Save again, but then you would give it a different name. So if I say Process Creation 2, that'll just save it under this name. If I actually wanted to make some modifications to this, so let's say instead of event ID 1, I want to search for event ID 11, right? Say I click on this, I can edit this filter, change the value to 11, click Save. And now this will only look for event ID 11. And now if I save that, this is not process creation anymore. This is event ID 11. So I'll just name this event ID 11. And then I'll say save as new search. So then we have both of them. I'm not actually going to do that because I think deleting them is kind of annoying and I forget how to do it. Yeah, there's like I think actually, no, it might be here. You go to Manage Searches. And then you can probably delete them from here. Yes. So I can click on this and then delete if you want to delete a search. Anyway, from there, let's say I want to create a dashboard with a bunch of searches on it. So you'll notice that some of the ones I already did is process creation, which is pretty much exactly what we were looking at. PowerShell logging and alerts, let's say. So if you look at this Wazuh alerts, I'm excluding anything that's Aurora because I'm kind of treating Aurora alerts separately. I'm searching for a rule level of greater than or equal to 12. Again, I could have defined that as a filter. Well, actually, so the thing to note about filters is here I could do rule.level. But remember, I only have these very basic operations. I only have is not, is one of, is not one of. So this is one of these cases where I do actually have to do the search up here. So if you want to use...
It had an option, like, I saw it, like writing a custom rule. No, not here, like create custom label. Not label, what is that? Oh, it's maybe something else. Oh, it's something else.
So this is if you wanted to, I think, if you wanted to create a label for this filter. I've actually never tried this before, so we're going to find out. So now when it shows up here, this is actually, now that I know you can do this, I might actually use this a lot more. But here in these filters, see how it gave it a nice name? So I think that's what that label does. It just gives it a nice name. So when you're looking here, you know exactly what it's, you don't have to see the ugly like rule. You can just see a nice readable name for it. Thanks for showing me that because I actually didn't know you could do that. That's pretty neat, especially when you get things like this. Let's see, which one has a lot of exclusions?
Is it PowerShell?
I think PowerShell logging has a bunch. See how you get these long ones? I could actually write like nice names for what it does. Anyway. So now you have kind of an idea of how this works. But once I have multiple of these queries, let's say, I can start creating a dashboard. So if I go here and I go to dashboards, I already have this purple team dashboard, but I'll create a new one. And so I'm just creating a new dashboard here and it says you can add an existing or a new object. So create a new object, I think gives me the option to create a visualization. This is the same thing as if I went here and then I went to visualize, right? I could create it that way too. But I can also add an existing object. So I can add either searches, right? Or I can add a visualization. So for example, one of those pie charts that we created, I could throw a pie chart on there. Or I could throw that query that we just created on there. So sysmon process creation. Now both of them are on here. And of course I can drag these around, resize them. Let's say I want this one to be the whole width of the page. and I can really customize how I want this dashboard to look. Once I'm done with the dashboard, just like I can save a query, I can save the dashboard by clicking Save and then giving it a title and a description, right? And that'll save the dashboard. Quick note, once you've already added, like I've added the pie chart and I've added this Sysmon process creation, if you want to add more things to the dashboard, you click the Add button in the top. So at the very beginning, when you first create the dashboard, they give you that nice little option that you can click Add Existing. But once you already add stuff to it, that's gone. You have to click the Add button up here to add more things. Got it?
Got it.
All right. That's pretty much all you need to know. Other than you can also, when you actually visit the dashboards, this is where you open dashboards that you've saved. So I've saved a dashboard here, Purple Team. So if I open this dashboard, you can see what I did is, and this is just looking at the last 15 minutes. Let's see if I expand this to 2 hours. Actually, probably more than 2 hours when I was doing stuff. Let's do 10 hours. So you can see I have Aurora alerts specifically for server 1, because server 1 is going to be our testing server. This is where we're going to run all our attacks and see if we can see them, right? To make that really easy, this is how I separated it out. I separated it out into alerts for server 1, so we'll right away see if we get an Aurora alert for something that we ran. We have PowerShell logging, so anything that I run in PowerShell will show up here. I didn't go over how to do PowerShell logging, but it's a similar process to Sysmon Event ID, right? You filter by provider name is PowerShell rather than Sysmon, right? And then from there, you can choose which columns you want. And then here I did process creation, which you already saw how we did that. And so we can right away see the relevant information here. It makes it nice and easy. In fact, I might want to, if let's say I want to edit this, I have to go into editing mode, edit search, and I'll create an exclusion for if like I did before, if the parent image is Microsoft Exchange Diagnostic Service, we're going to consider that legitimate. So I'm going to filter out value. And there we go. And then I'll save that. And I will keep the same name. Boom. And if I go back to my dashboard, there we go. Now it's much easier to see just more relevant processes that are being run here and the full command line. So when we actually go through, and the last one here that I did is Aurora, also on the domain controllers. It searches for LDAP events and it alerts for suspicious LDAP reconnaissance. So here, when I do an LDAP recon, so you can see actually I'll demonstrate this because it's kind of cool to see. If I go in PowerShell, I can use Active Directory PowerShell, for example, to pull down a list of domain users. And what this does under the hood is it reaches out to the domain controller, DCO1, and it provides it a query, right, that the domain controller then responds to. So in the end, the information that as an attacker, if we run this, the information we get is we get all this information about all the users that are on the domain. But if we go back to our search here, and I can even set this now for the last 15 minutes. Fell out of navigation. Oops. Relative. Okay, yeah, this is it. So we don't have any, sometimes when errors pop up, you just have to try doing the same thing again. That's just what you do in Wazuh for whatever reason. Anyway, we don't have any alerts on server 1, But if we look in PowerShell logging, and I'll exit out of, no, we're good. Okay. If we look under PowerShell logging, we see the full command that we ran, get AD user -filter star, right? And on the domain controller, it shows us the actual LDAP query that was run under the hood, which happened to look for any object class. For some reason, this is just what it did by default. Then it's further searched for object class as user and object category as person, right? So this is the actual LDAP filter that was passed in the raw traffic that got sent to the domain controller. Another place, I don't have this set up right now, but another place that we would be able to see this is if the LDAP query was done in clear text, which it probably was, then if we were looking at our network traffic logs, we'd also be able to see it in our network traffic logs. So Suricata, which is our intrusion detection, intrusion prevention system, but it also logs network traffic, should also be able to see from source IP, whatever server 1 is, to destination IP, whatever DCO1 is. You should also be able to see that query and the response that was returned. So this is how we get visibility into what's going on in the environment. And then from there, you can already start thinking about how we can write rules. Let's say you don't want somebody, let's say it's not normal for users in your domain to pull down, let's say it's not normal for them to use get AD user. You could create a rule that looks for get AD user. If you're going to do that, what you might want to do is open the search up and see how common it is for somebody to run get AD user. So maybe to this, you'll add and data.win.event-data.script block text get AD user wildcard, right? So anything that starts with get AD user, pull that down. And maybe we can now expand the search to like 3 days ago. I don't know why it keeps giving me this. Scoped histories fell out of navigation scope. Refresh, there you go. And now you'll see we have 2 instances that popped up, right? When I ran it earlier during testing, you can even see the time I ran it was earlier this evening. And then the time we just ran it, which was at 11:28. And now, because we only saw 2 instances of this, I know maybe it's a good candidate to create an alert on. Because if we're only seeing it fire twice in 3 days, I think that's reasonable for our SOC to investigate. But if I saw hundreds of these in the last hour, then it might not be worth creating a rule looking for get AD user. So this is really the process of developing rules. This is what you do. You think about something an attacker might do. You think about the telemetry it would generate. And then from there, you would see how often that happens in your, you would think of like some fields that you can search for specific things that you could create a rule out of. Then you would see how often that happens in your environment. If that happens in your environment very often, then you can't create a rule off of that. But if it's pretty rare, then you can create a rule off of it. And then if I were to actually create that rule, let's follow through. We know that it's going to be a child of the main sysmon event rule, right? And we know it's going to be a child of sysmon event 1. So I can grab this. I'm just going to do it in a notepad document, but of course I could actually do it in Wazuh as well. So we can do if group, we can kind of copy this existing one, if group sysmon event 1. Now we want the field name equals, and then we want it to pull down. By default, it automatically appends that data at the beginning when you're writing a rule. So you would actually start with win in the field name. So if we do field name is when event data script block text, and we want it to start with get AD user. So we'll use this operator means start with or beginning. Get AD user, we can give it a description. We can say, and actually, sorry, I don't know why I'm doing sysmon. This is PowerShell logging, right? So my apologies there. We have to actually find the rules for PowerShell logging. PowerShell rules, how about that? So let's see how these are written. This is group of Windows rules for the PowerShell operational channel. That looks about right. So I can make this the parent then in this case. And I'll make a child rule of that. So I'll kind of copy this one. Let me just grab this as well, because this will come in handy. Okay. So this I do want to be the parent. I would choose a new ID that isn't in use yet. So like 111000, something like that. There's actually a predefined range that Wazuh recommends you choose for creating new rules, just in case they end up updating their existing rule set. Then from there, in this case, we're searching for field name is script block text. The value starts with get AD user. In this case, let's say, so you can also choose to whether it includes the full log or doesn't include the full log. Let's say in this case, we know we'll have all the information that we need decoded. It won't be important for us to view the full log. Typically what you'll do, I know I'm throwing a lot in one sitting, but typically what you'll do is for like the very base rule, and they didn't seem to do it here, but for the very base rule, you will include the full log. So if you want to develop an exclusion off of it, you have that full log so you can do testing with it later, right? But when you actually create a child rule or an exclusion or something like that, and you know you won't need to create any children off of that one, you can say no full log just to not log that log, which will...
the parent has a full log.
Yeah, the parent will have a full log, but the child won't. But the child is the one that gets triggered in the end. So then it kind of saves space because you won't be using the full log because you have all that information already decoded. So there's no point in having the original raw log in addition to the decoded data. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I know that was confusingly explained, but there you go.
We get a MITRE ID T1113.
And you can add a MITRE ID to it. So how about
to look for the
MITRE domain recon? Let's see what we got. Connaissance. Let's see what we got in here. We probably have like user enumeration. I should know this. I've worked with MITRE so often, but if we go to MITRE attack framework, this is going to be discovery, and it's going to be account discovery, and it's going to be domain account. So the MITRE tactic is T10870002. And if you look at what it says, look at that. LDAP search on Linux, or you could do get AD user or get AD group number. So that is the exact MITRE tactic that we're looking for. We can throw that right in there for our MITRE tactic. And we can say...
We can copy the description from MITRE and just paste it like this.
So yeah, so I believe what Wazuh does actually, when you assign it a MITRE tactic, it'll give you a link to the actual MITRE page where you can go and learn more about it if you want to. So we could say get AD or enumerate domain users. And when we give this level of 14, we said 14 is a high, right? So now we'll have a high alert whenever that happens. So we've created a new rule here. Part of me wants to kind of put this in production and see if we can trigger it. It's going to take so much time though. But yeah, if we put this in
It
production,
won't we just need to restart it to save it restart.
okay, you're right. I guess it won't take that long.
Won't take a lot of time.
So let's try it. So if you go to Wazuh, rules, that's a good point. Anyway, if I manage rule files and I go to custom ones, I'll just add it to this local rules file just because for practice. We'll throw it here. I don't think it needs a group. It might complain that it doesn't have a group assigned to it. If it does complain, then I'll just give it a group. But we are about to find out. And I'm just making the tabbing nice in case it complains about the tabbing. So if I click save, we'll see if it complains.
I think we should test it. No, we cannot test it.
Yeah, so I would actually need a log sample to test it, but I'll just put it in production. We'll see if it works. Equals. I should probably use the same. Well, so what I should do, if I'm doing this right, is I should grab this and copy this. So I'll say Windows PowerShell, and then I'll also add local because this is a local rule that we created, not one of their built-in ones. I'm also curious if it's mad that I have two separate groups in here. I don't think that should make a difference, but we're about to find out. Okay, so now that I added it to a group, it's happy. And if I click restart.
Why we need to add local there?
You don't have to, that's optional. I chose to add local because that's what they suggested doing here. See in the example one that they have, they added local. And that just it's just for group, for searching purposes. Like let's say I wanted to search my own custom rules. I could now search by group as local. Right.
So these are the rules that you have to find.
Yeah. And I actually didn't add local in there for the Aurora ones that I created, but it's just preference.
Then we should run it and then have a look at it.
Yeah. So if we go to Wazuh alerts, you'll notice we already have that potential Active Directory recon via LDAP from Aurora. But now with this new one that I created, we should see this one trigger again, plus this new rule that I created. And this rule that I created should trigger at a higher severity. So we'll see what we get. So I will maximize this. And I will run this one more time. I heard, did you hear the ding from Discord?
I heard it 2 times, so they're 2, yeah.
So look at that. We have our old rule from Aurora, but we have this new one rule that was created called the enumerate domain users. You can see it's red with a high severity. And the log that we got it from was PowerShell operational. And it also tells you the agent SRV01. So at this point, if I'm a SOC analyst, I see this alert, I could go in, I could do those searches like I showed you before to learn more about it. So I could go into so if I were a SOC analyst, I'd go in, I'd be like, oh, I got an alert, let's investigate it. I have this nice dashboard that has alerts. So let's see what's on my dashboard. And looks like it didn't come through yet. Yes. Or no, I have to actually, wrong one, sorry. This is not an Aurora alert, this is a Wazuh alert, so I have to go to my Wazuh one here. Could be like, okay, let's drill into this a little bit, let's see what happened. Oh, looks like somebody ran get AD user dash filter star. Who ran that, I wonder? Oh, I can go down here and I know it says the user somewhere. Actually, maybe it doesn't say the user, but at least it gives me a process. So it gives me this process ID, right? So then what I can do...
It should give a user, right? Or no?
Yeah, I guess it doesn't look like it does unless I'm missing it. I could just be missing it. data.name. In any case, I do have a process ID that I can work with. So then what I can do is I can filter for that process ID, and I can remove our other filters here. And I can see, this is a great, okay, let me show you something else that you can do with Wazuh that is really cool. If I can remember how to do it. See how it says view surrounding documents? If I click view surrounding documents, it'll show me what happened around the time that this alert was triggered. So we can see other things that are around it. And unfortunately, I'm not sure if there's a way to get it to show everything, because right now it's only showing alerts. We only got that alert. But anyway, point is, what I was doing before, I could look at the timestamp. So the timestamp on that was around 2344. I can search by that process ID and see what else. Whoa, what are you doing? See what else we get for that process ID. We do not get anything here, but maybe it might be a different field. So let's just search 6392. And now if we search 6392,
even data user,
we have the user now. So we have the IRE vagrant. This is actually just calling out that an executable file. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm kind of all over the place. But if I should have been in archives, then if I do it's still searching. It's just taking a while. There we go. So I had this. And now I think if I do view surrounding documents, because I'm in Wazuh archives, now I think it'll show all of them. We're about to find out. I'm learning here too. Oh no. Apparently not. Apparently didn't like that. Anyway, sorry, I'm just kind of playing around at this point, but I might actually cut this out of the video because I'm just kind of all over the place. But if we look around the time that we ran get AD user,
I think you should keep it in the videos something different.
Sure. So
this can give people idea that you can how can you play
true,
using different filters.
So here, let me grab the process ID. I'm going to filter for process ID, and then I'm going to remove my get AD user. And I think the search finished. I'll just refresh one more time just to make sure. And now we can see everything that we did in that PowerShell process. So let's say I also wanted to search by. So first of all, we now have the user. If I look at one of these other logs, we can search for a process creation. Let's say we did, win data.win.event data.event ID. No, that's not it. What was it? It was I'm trying to remember how to search for process creation here. I can make my life easier. Let's do sysmon. Oh, we got nothing for that process from sysmon. Oh yeah, because there was no. Okay, I probably opened the PowerShell window before I started the forwarder in Wazuh, so that's probably why I didn't get the. Normally, you should get a. Well, actually, let's try this. Sysmon and What was the process? Oh my gosh. Back to this. Let's do, because Sysmon might be using different fields than the PowerShell logging is. So let me just directly fuzzy search by the process ID and Sysmon. So if I do Sysmon and 6392, now we just get Sysmon logs that have 6392. And we can see that process ID. So the difference here is the D is a lowercase. So that's why we weren't seeing it before. Now I can just directly add that filter and make my life a little easier. And then we'll see what we have here. We have
username as well.
We have the username, but I just wanted to show that I could see the process creation. So sysmon.eventID. So I can filter by this event ID, but then I can change it. So let's say I change this to BO1, which is process creation. Save. We should only see one of those. There we go. And now, the reason this is useful is because we have the exact timestamp of when that PowerShell the process was first opened by us, right? So now we know kind of a time frame of where we want to look at what PowerShell commands were run between that time when the PowerShell window was first opened and the current time. And then I could even make my life a little easier. I can see I could see what user. So here we have the parent user, the current user. So if I add the user, now I have the user and the timestamp here. So as you can see, I'm just showing you like a threat hunting scenario. Now I know there's this PowerShell process.
This is not showing because in the search bar you have searched for Sysmon and 6392, and that one is not a Sysmon process. That's a PowerShell process.
Yes.
So that's why we're not able to see
right, exactly. Yeah. So I'm just showing how you can kind of work your way back. You can figure out when the process was first launched, and then from there you can view PowerShell logs associated with it. So let's say I opened my PowerShell logging here on server 01, and then I just added, I keep forgetting to data.win.system.process.id.
But small
is
that one is like a small d?
This one's a big D because I'm searching PowerShell logs.
Oh, okay. It's Sysmon, it's a small d. Yeah.
I know, it's kind of annoying like that. And I believe there is a way we could correlate them together in Wazuh, but probably not worth it. It's fine. And now if I do that filter, see now I'm just filtering by the process ID. Now we can see every command that we ran in that PowerShell window, which should have been dir ipconfig and then the get AD user 3 times. And if I scroll up here, dir ipconfig get AD user. So that's how you would threat hunt in Wazuh. And write rules in Wazuh. Cool. And I think that's a good place to wrap it up for today. Another thing that I probably should have shown, just to show you the full path that this is taking, right? So we saw that when we ran ipconfig in our command prompt, we saw that in Sysmon with event ID 1, right?
Yep.
That's actually on disk stored. These Sysmon logs are stored on disk. So if I go to the event viewer and I go to applications and service logs, Microsoft, Windows, Sysmon, and I go to operational, everything that's being sent to Wazuh you can also see it here. Yeah. So somewhere here, if I dug deep enough.
With ID 11, we can see file created.
Yeah, but with the ID 1, I should see process creation. So if I run ipconfig again, and I refresh my log,
we see another one.
We see another one, and it should have all the same information. There's the command line. All the same information that you see in Wazuh. And then what happens is Wazuh and its configuration file, so there's this ossec.conf file in Wazuh, It's actually in C program files, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, C program files x86 OSSec agent, ossec.conf. And here we're saying, I want you to forward Microsoft Windows Sysmon operational, Microsoft Windows Sysmon operational. Forward that, and the log type is event channel because we open it in Event Viewer. It's a Windows event log. Okay. Then we look in Wazuh, that comes into Wazuh, and guess what? It goes through our rules and decoders, and that's how, after it's decoded, we can see it in Wazuh. Got it. Is the whole process making sense? Are there any questions?
It's definitely making sense.
Yeah. And the same process for Aurora, right? So let's do it with Aurora. I think this is going to be a good example. And then we'll call it a day, I promise.
I can literally told you I can stay here for whole night.
Nice.
And I'm good.
So in Aurora, remember when we did that get AD user -filter star and it did that LDAP query to the DC? So in Aurora, if we go to log sources and we go to mappings, I don't have Notepad++ on here, which is annoying, but it's the same thing on the server one. So if I open our ETW log sources in Aurora, and this is again a file on disk that defines where we get information from in ETW. As part of that, we have, for example, TCP connect, TCP accept. Now my guess would be that those LDAP queries would be somewhere in there. These are all the actual ETW, all the ETW providers that it subscribes to. So there we have this remote thread creation provider, we have raw disk access provider, and audit process open provider, right? We have all these providers that it subscribes to. And then this configuration here defines what it actually obtains from that provider, right? And so one of these providers will have logged this network connection that happened. And when I shouldn't say logged, one of these providers will have knowledge of the network connection that happened, and it will be providing it to us in real time through ETW. So we'll grab it from there. Then the next thing that will happen is it'll look through its rules. And so here we have maybe network connection. I'm trying to see if anything else matches better, but network connection, I think, matches the best. And then let's see if we have LDAP in here.
No, we don't have it.
So let me do a little bit of a broader search here. We have an LDAP folder under built-in. Okay. And then here we have the rule defined for LDAP recon. So this is what it actually looks for. It looks for if the search filter contains any one of these. And because our search filter contained object category equals person, right? It triggered this. So here's the actual condition. This is getting a little bit into Sigma, how Sigma rules are written. But in Sigma rules, we have this condition that it looks for. It's just another way of writing rules. Like in Wazuh, we're using XML. Here we're using this nice YAML format. And here's the condition that we're looking for. So we can define generic search and not narrow down files or suspicious flag or distinguished name enumeration. So in this case, it's matching on or suspicious flag. And if we look at what suspicious flag is, or actually, it might not be. That's a lie. It's not actually matching on that. It's probably doing generic search and not narrow down filter. So generic search contains one of these, and it does in fact contain this. And what was the other one? Narrow down filter, event ID 30. So search filter contains object sid equals star. Remember we had that object sid equals star at the beginning of the filter as well. So it matches here, and this triggers an alert in Aurora, right? we can actually view that alert in Aurora by going to the dashboard on the domain controller, assuming it loaded. It may not load because Internet Explorer is annoying. Yeah, it's not actually going to load. But if we open the Aurora dashboard, and this one I'm going to open in Firefox so that it does load, we would be able to see it here on the host, right? So we would see this rule that got triggered, or this alert that got triggered. Then from there, that also, we said we wanted to write any alerts that get triggered from Aurora to this file called Aurora Alerts JSON, right? And then what we're doing is in our ossec.conf file, we're also forwarding any Aurora alerts or anything that gets added to this Aurora Alerts JSON.log file in JSON format to Wazuh. And then in Wazuh, I know this is a whole process, but just to walk you through the whole process, we have manage rules files, custom rules, this custom set of rules that I defined that look for decoded as JSON, right? If the Aurora event ID field is present, we know it's an Aurora log. And I have this Aurora alerts. And for each level in Aurora, so in Aurora, it assigns it this rule level and it actually gives it a value like low, medium, high, or critical. I mapped it to a rule in Wazuh and gave it the corresponding level so that then it gets alerted on and goes to Wazuh, and goes to Discord. Questions? I know that was a lot, the whole process,
but like, I do have like a question. I'm not like really familiar with Aurora.
Sure.
Why we were using that? What's the purpose?
Yes.
Yeah. And what sort of alerts it is generating?
And what other sort of what?
What sort of alerts this Aurora is generating?
Sure.
Because for Wazuh, we know like every sort of log is getting forwarded to whatsoever like is defined as in ossec config file.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever is defined here, we know that those logs are getting forwarded to Wazuh.
You were here last week, right?
Yeah, I was here.
Okay. I remember you being here, but let's do this. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what's the purpose of having Aurora when we have sysmon and event logs, right? Well, our sim here can't directly interact with ETW.
Yes, it cannot.
So it is reliant on other sources of information for ETW, right? So that's one reason why we want to have Aurora, because sysmon will pick up some things from ETW, like process creation, but Aurora looks at a lot more like kernel-related stuff, as you could see all those things that it was looking at. So that's one reason why it's useful to have Aurora. The second reason is to maintain the whole organization structure that I talked about here. Let's say, in theory, Aurora should have greater visibility over what's going on in that endpoint and only send data that's relevant to Wazuh.
Okay.
So if we were to actually look in the Aurora dashboard, I actually don't know if Aurora has this, but if we were to look in the Aurora dashboard, we could probably see all the logs that Aurora is receiving from ETW, or not logs, but all of the events that Aurora is receiving from ETW. But all of those events, it wouldn't make sense to forward everything to our sim, to Wazuh, because that would just be inundating it with information. It would just be way too much information. So Aurora looks at those ETW events for us, determines what's actually relevant, and already has its own set of alerts for that. And then those it forwards to Wazuh, where we can then subsequently choose to alert on it or treat it differently if we want to.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
And this is typically how it would be organized in a real organization. They probably wouldn't be using the free version of Aurora, which only uses ETW. They would probably be using, like, let's say, CrowdStrike, right? CrowdStrike would be the EDR that looks not just at ETW, but a lot of different things. It makes its own decision of what's important, like rules, and then it forwards what it thinks it's important to the SIM, which, let's say, in the real world might be a paid SIM like Splunk.
Sysmon does get like event logs as well or not? I just forget about that.
Yes. So Sysmon takes its information just like EDR. Sysmon takes its information from a few different places, which include event logs, so things that are stored to disk, and ETW, or information that is presented live from a producer. And then Sysmon aggregates that information and both presents it live using ETW, or it also writes it to disk, which is where we were looking at it in Windows Event Viewer when we opened it in the Event Viewer application.
None of the ETW is like stored on disk. No, only Sysmon is capturing that because it's live, right?
Yes. So Sysmon is attaching to all those ETW producers that are providing information. It's taking that information and it is storing what it thinks is relevant on disk. Because if you were to store everything in ETW on disk, that would be way too much, would take up way too much disk space. So Sysmon just takes from ETW what it thinks is relevant and logs that to disk.
And most probably or like in general, ETW is like used for troubleshooting stuff like that, right?
I mean, once you have like Sysmon, as a defender, once you have Sysmon, your EDR, your SIM set up, you probably wouldn't even care to touch EDW. There's no point because all of the relevant information is going through Sysmon or going through your EDR. Yes, if you want more granular visibility, you could look at ETW, but the whole purpose of these tools is to give you all of the relevant information that you should need for an investigation, while filtering out the noise.
So like whatever EDW is there, only relevant EDW is stored by Sysmon.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
And event logs, like all sort of events logs are there that are stored on disk. So Sysmon has access to those event logs as well.
Yep.
And then EDR is getting information from Sysmon, from event logs as well, and from EDW as well.
Yeah. It depends on the EDR. EDR can get it from any combination of those places. Aurora, which is free, or actually I should say Aurora Lite, which is free, only gets its information from ETW. But most enterprise EDR uses a variety of sources to pull its information. In the end, it interprets what it thinks is important and forwards that to the SIM.
So it totally depends on like the developers of the specific EDR that from where they're like fetching their information.
It's totally up to them. Got it. It's also up to the defender whether. So in this graphic, for example, we have Sysmon going into the EDR and EDR going into the SIM. But Sysmon is not directly going into the SIM. But it's up to you as a defender. Do you want Sysmon going into the EDR and then EDR going into the SIM, or do you want Sysmon going into the SIM? Or do you want both Sysmon going to the EDR, going to the SIM, and Sysmon going to the SIM? Just depends on
how you configure
what level of visibility you want to have. Yeah. And so when you're configuring your SIM, you can choose, do you want to forward Sysmon logs to or just EDR logs? Whether Sysmon goes into the EDR is more up to the person who developed the EDR, really, than it is up to you as the defender. But when it comes to the SIM, you can choose whether you want Sysmon or EDR to go into the SIM.
Because like if you talk about EDR, it totally depends like what sort of logs that specific EDR is getting from the Sysmon. Yes. And maybe you need more data than that, or maybe you don't even need like a lot of the logs that EDR is getting. You need something else. So in that case, like you should be referred to Sysmon.
And EDR is kind of designed more to get its information from a predetermined set of sources, right? That ideally the person who created the EDR was like, this is going to be a good set of sources to get your information from. Whereas a SIM, you specify the logs that you want to pull data from. So that's the difference there.
Because like the developers of the EDR, they're just developing that specific EDR, thinking that what is the main purpose of this EDR?
Yeah, okay. Exactly.
And there can be a possibility that when you're integrating the CM in your organization, there might be a possibility that you won't be needing like those EDR sources.
That's true.
Maybe you have like a different plan, or maybe your organization has like a set of like, you can say, protocols that you need to follow that cannot be fulfilled by using specific EDR.
Definitely. Even within EDR too, I mean, it depends on the EDR, but a lot of EDR will also have different intensities, I guess, for how much information they collect that you can configure based on your environment. It's not as, you usually don't get as much flexibility as with a SIM where you can choose exactly what sources it pulls from. But at the very least, you could choose like, oh, here's a less aggressive where it only collects the most important data. Here's versus the most aggressive where it collects as much data as possible. And which one you choose, again, depends on your environment and how well your machines will handle that.
Are there any certain frameworks that define like which data is important that needs to be collected for CM? Like, just like we have
That's
like
a good question.
Just like we have like CVE, we got Matre, we got like a lot of stuff that's organized.
Yeah.
That, okay, this...
I'm not a compliance person, so I don't want to misspeak, but I don't think there's a set information that needs to be going to the SIM. I think that is up to the organization, but they do need to be able to respond adequately to certain kinds of attacks. And if they can't see what's happening, then of course that will hinder them from being able to respond to those kinds of attacks. So I don't think legal or compliance frameworks get as granular as saying you need to have sysmon going to your SIM or you need to have PowerShell logging going to your SIM. But they will say things like you need to have this degree of visibility into the environment. And then how the organization chooses to set that up is up to them. Like, for example, sysmon audits, or okay, that's a bad example. Let's take let's take PowerShell logging. I guess I'm tired. Let's take PowerShell logging, for example. You can install PowerShell logging and have PowerShell logs forwarded to the SIM. That's one option. Or let's say you use CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike already does logging of every command you run in PowerShell. I don't think it does it quite the same way that PowerShell logging does, but again, it's somehow hooking into when you run a command in PowerShell and logging that command. So you might, as an organization, decide that you don't need PowerShell logging, and instead you'll just ingest that information from CrowdStrike into your SIM. Or as an organization, you might decide, I don't need that level of detail in my SIM. I can just have those logs in CrowdStrike, and then I'll just get the alerts in the SIM. And then if I need to investigate, I can switch over to CrowdStrike and look at the commands that were actually run there. So these are just the tools that organizations have at their disposal, but how they choose to use them is up to the organization. Questions?
No.
Okay. It's all starting to click slowly but surely after you see this 100 times over, maybe.
But like in the beginning, like last week, you discussed about this presentation, all this EDW and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't make like a lot of sense back then, but now like we delve more into
context,
it. Now it's making like the context of the entire session we had. Now we can connect it with this entire graphical representation.
That's great.